Good afternoon and welcome to Building a Semantic Layer for the Modern Data Stack, connecting knowledge and data silos. Today we're going to be joined by our panel of experts. So we've got myself, I'll be the moderator, I'll be the one asking questions today. We've got Lilith Tesfaye, she's a partner and VP of Knowledge and Data Services at Enterprise Knowledge. We've got David Lotion, President of Knowledge Integrity Incorporated, and hopefully Jim will also be joining us today from the progress side of the business. He's just dealing with some stuff now, so hopefully he can join us later. If not, I'll try and answer the semaphore-related questions. This is the agenda. We're going to look at the current business landscape and challenges, the essence and components and purpose of the semantic layer, some business use cases and applications where you might see the semantic layer, the advantages of the semantic layer to leverage sort of the enterprise content that you have in your business, approaches for implementing it, and the technologies considerations for the semantic layer use as well. And then if we've got time at the end, we'd love to take some questions and answers from the audience. You can answer those or raise your hand and ask a question. Should be on the right-hand side of your screen. There should be a little hand symbol there. Type your question in, and we'll get to as many of those as we can during our Q&A session at the end. So let me stop sharing my screen so we can see our wonderful panel. There we go. Perfect. Lily, David, thank you. And thanks for joining us today. And we're really excited to have you here. We've got lots of questions to go through. I don't know whether we're going to get through them all already. But let's kick off by looking at the core definition of what we're going to talk about today, that semantic layer. What is the semantic layer and kind of how does it fit into a modern data stack? Maybe we'll start you Lily. What's your thoughts on that?
Thanks, Philip. Thanks for having me here. So I want to start that by saying it's nothing new. In fact, we're really connecting the pieces. We've been working with taxonomies, ontologies, semantic solutions, graph for 2-3 decades at this point. So it's really important to call out today why we are talking about it is because it allows us, we have the solutions that would allow us to weave these components together. So the very simple definition I would give it is that knowledge or aggregation layer that shifts the focus from the physical data itself to the data, the descriptive data about the data. So metadata, the meaning and vocabulary of the data, taxonomies, the relationships between the different data types, ontologies, and graphs. These are the components of what is within a semantic layer. And I think it's important to also call out that there's misconception that it's one tool or a solution. It's not. It's a framework. It's not just a knowledge graph, that although that's one component, there are some use cases that just have benefit and use taxonomies, business glossaries, and metadata and don't need necessarily to shift into a graph maturity level. And then the last piece is, back, I think it was 2021, Gartner dubbed a thing called the data fabric, which is somewhat focused on the structured side of the world, whereas a semantic layer is about all of your organizational knowledge assets, structured, unstructured, semi-structured. So it really doesn't care about what type of data that you have. It cares about the aboutness of your data and how you can connect it. So that's how I would define the semantic layer. But David, would love to hear from you if you want to add anything else too.
Yeah, actually, I would love to be able to add maybe a pragmatic perspective on that, which is in many organizations, over the organic development of the data landscape across all the different, you might say, siloed or vertical applications that were designed to support the way the business is run, embodies content and knowledge about those entities that are the subject of the way those applications are executing it and what the objectives are. But because of you might say the absence of a coherent conversation across, horizontally across these different application verticals, there's variation in the ways that the same things are represented in different instances. And so one of the benefits of a semantic layer is to be able to make that conversation relevant and be able to provide a means, or essentially an interface that bridges the physical representations of these different concepts and their individual meanings as applied within the context of the applications, and the overall perspective from the enterprise view, which is what are the representations of these entities that can be unified into a semantically consistent view. So from a practical perspective, you've got the sales organization that has a database of customers, and you've got the customer support organization that has a database of customers. And even at that very kind of simplistic level, the definition of what a customer is may differ widely, because from the sales perspective, they care about the people who are, paying the money for the product, while the customer support deals with those individuals who are actually using the product and may experience some issue with it. So we have the same words being used, but very diverse meanings. And the value of a semantic layer is to capture some of that and then be able to provide a reference mechanism to harmonize those representations, so that when somebody on the end, a business analyst, wants to count how many customers the organization has, they don't come up with 3 or 4 or 5 different numbers, but rather they've got a more well-defined definition of what they mean by customer within that analytics context, and they've got a meaningful answer. So the way that you've described it is great, because it kind of talks about the approach taken to be able to make that semantic layer work. And I guess what I've been adding is the context of how that adds value to the data users in the organization.
Yeah, it's almost like you're using a common language across the business to describe both the way you're describing your business language, so maybe the products, services, how you define customers, things like that, but also then bringing in that domain language to that as well. So, with those taxonomies and ontologies, like how are you describing the world that your business exists in, and kind of combining those two for that sort of language, that overall language that might be used in your business. Yeah, it's really, really interesting. And, so, I mean, we touched on the key components. We've got those taxonomies, the ontologies, the knowledge graphs on those. Can we just sort of, the link between each of those, and kind of, we went very quickly, but we could maybe sort of describe those components and what features, functions they do. Maybe Lily, we could start with you on that one.
Sure. Yeah. So one way to look at it is for some, it's the maturity spectrum of use cases. So the core kind of, if you think of it like on the left, you start with your taxonomies, right? Like the way you describe things early on. And then when you mature into a more semantically rich organization, you start structuring those entities into hierarchies, right? This is a part of something. This is parent-child relationships. That's when you start getting into taxonomies. And the metadata is the meta of the taxonomy. So a simple way to think about it is, if you are buying a TV on Amazon, when you are searching for it, on the left-hand side, you get this facets for size, for color, for type. Those are your metadata components. And the vocabularies that you put and to describe those are your taxonomies. So what type of TV it is, what kind of product you talk about within your organization. So that's your taxonomy, is alignment around how you describe something. And Philip, I like what you said earlier around, getting behind similar vocabularies. The good news is, as solutions mature in the semantic space, you are able to use alternative labels and different. You don't need to get the business to agree with one word. It's impossible. They will not, right? We've been on the journey of defining customer for decades now. So now we have the ability the solutions and the tools that would allow us to use different ways, the way we would, to describe things, and then pick the more preferred label for that. So that's taxonomies. And then when you mature a little bit further into that and say, how is this product related to the store or to this customer? That's when you start talking about relationships between your things and places, the entities. And that's when you start talking about ontologies. So ontologies really allow us to explicitly tell our machines, our applications, how we know something is related. But,
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
that would be, yeah, good.
I was just going to say, it's almost like you're applying the human to the machine. You're finally describing. People say, "Oh, it does." AI or your machine doesn't know what that word means. It doesn't know what TV means. So if you call it television the next time, it's not going to know that those two are the same things. But us as human beings have that cognition to be able to do that. And it's almost like you're applying that human cognition across your data, which I think is really interesting, especially given the current sort of trends and challenges out there.
Yeah, it's even more important for organizations like in the enterprise context, because TV is easier for AI to understand because there is certain logic and words behind it. But when you get to the organizational context, credit for a bank is very different from credit for a retail organization, right? Like that inherent meaning or context behind your organization is what, in the world of AI, it lacks. The large language models especially lack when they want to contextualize for your organization. I'll give you an example. We had one of the largest commercial real estate organizations come to us because they lost one of their biggest clients or key accounts. Because one of their regional sales representatives in Washington, D.C., recommended to them to buy a property in California, which they already owned. So, needless to say, this person was acting with a dumb bot that is making recommendations without the full picture of that customer's portfolio and understanding and making these decisions in silos. So, this has real impacts to organizations' bottom lines, right? Like not being able to connect your information so that you have a full picture to make a decision. So this is where semantics and semantic solutions come into play to help you make that connection.
Yeah.
And one of the benefits of what you're saying is kind of drills out directly back at the single view of customer or single version of the truth. There is no single version of the truth. It's rather the interpretation of the information that's available, and that interpretation is based on who's consuming it, not who's producing it. And so that's why the value of having a knowledge model and having the taxonomies provides you with the ability to lend context to the use of that terminology within the different areas. And the benefit is that it goes beyond just structured data. So yes, I can talk about customers, but in reality, or credit. But if I'm talking about commercial credit versus individual credit or bank credit or credit cards, a human will really understand that, and a ungoverned AI system or large language model is going to make some prediction about what those terms imply in the stream of producing other content, but there's no control over whether that's producing something that is, I'll use the word. I'm not even going to use the word believable. I'm going to say the word accurate enough to be able to trust it. And so the use of these knowledge models becomes almost like setting up the guardrails around how organizations transition from solely relying on structured data to an atmosphere that combines both structured and semi-structured and unstructured data in a way that actually produces believable and trustworthy results.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
It's interesting. Yeah. I, I like the combination of kind of both of what you said there, which is, we've talked on it, we touched on it. AI, is driving some of this, but it goes back to Lalit's point earlier, where this is nothing new. We've been saying to organizations to do this for a long time now. Certain organizations are very well placed at the moment, and we have customers that are able to really take advantage of these technologies because they've done this work. They have contextualized their data to a point where it is machine readable, machine interpretable, and therefore you can derive insight and meaning from that as a machine, not just as the individual. Um, and it kind of brings us to that business challenges and market trends. So the market trend is, it is AI. That is what's driving these conversations. Let's be honest. I don't think I've had a conversation. I may be going on 2 years now where it hasn't been brought up. But what I really see is the business challenges for the adoption of these things, and where do you see those playing out at the moment? Is there a disconnect between the business and the data teams? Is there a disconnect between the AI team and the business team? What challenges are you seeing in this space at the moment? Maybe Lily, you could take that one.
Yeah. So, if you asked me this question maybe 3-4 years ago, my answer would be slightly different. And I think we know what happened over the past couple of years. But despite Gen AI or whatnot, in the space that we are, if you had asked me this question 3-4 years ago, we had, like, if I do a quick scan of our clients, there were maybe like 20-30% that were experimenting or piloting with semantics. That number today has shifted to like 50-60% of organizations that are doing this. So,
Yes.
Needless to say, I am one of those people who is very excited about the hype or no hype
Yep.
with AI, because it's really exposing all the bad practices in the data, content, structure, management side of the world, especially to the C-level organizations. So that shift, the trend that we're seeing right now, semantics used to be a thing for library science people,
Yep.
right? Like on the unstructured side. Today, the biggest shift that we're seeing is that the need and demand is coming from the data and analytics teams that are being forced to own AI, specifically Gen AI, which is pushing them to understand unstructured content or semi-structured content, right? So that's a shift in how we are seeing the use cases for semantics. So to give you a very specific use case, we have been working with this organization. It's one of the largest retailers, and they went through a data migration effort, moving their data physically into a data lake and a data warehouse, creating that infrastructure. However, as many of us have gone through this, you realize that putting data physically in one place doesn't really allow you to answer these business questions about how this thing is related to this data. The PDF is related to your structured data. So the data and analytics team brought us in to help them define a semantic ecosystem that does a couple of things. One is create this shared metadata and business glossary layer. Because what was happening is that every time their C-level person or leadership asks for a dashboard to do, say, how are we doing at this store in Japan, like a store health kind of a performance check, they would spin up a whole team, go looking for data. To set up a dashboard, it would take them about 5 to 6 months and upwards of $900,000. And it would still be wrong, whatever they put together, because the revenue for the store in Japan is very different, and headcount and how they calculate the matrix for store performance is very different for one store, and which team worked on that store, and the other side of the analytics that they get from another store, which means they're not comparing apples to apples. It's always, wrong and very costly. So the whole exercise of their use case for a semantic layer was really help us define these data products. When we say store matrix, what are the data components that we care about? And what do we mean by when we say revenue? What goes into that data? What do we mean by headcount, right? What do we mean by operational machines within the stores, right? So just defining this business glossary, a good old business glossary, and then getting the metadata and creating these data products for the matrix. So you can see that a semantic layer use case for this in this instance is really aligning their data teams behind what you should look for, what is meant by a certain word, and what data falls into that, these data product concepts. And that's something, a big shift that we're seeing now on which pockets of the organization are investing in the semantic ecosystem or semantic layer. It is this alignment for their data products and pulling in, and when we say data products, as you can see, it's not just structured data. It's moving away from that and moving away from being application centric, right? It's more object and data centric, the entity centric mind frame. That's a big use case that we're seeing right now, coming from the data side.
Yeah, and David, we kind of touched on there, which is significant cost savings and things like that. But what would you say would be the sort of common advantages for businesses building that semantic layer, really combining those disparate technologies and that disparate data, whether it's in one resource or whether it's in multiple different resources across the company?
So actually, I have two different perspectives on that. The first is from the perspective of something that I've worked on for 3 decades, which is master data management, and this desire, and I referred to this earlier, but this desire to get some golden source of data. When I think we all suspect this, and I'm going to say it out loud. That's a fallacy. There is no such thing as a single source of truth. And the problem is that it's really hard to convince, an organization that has invested millions of dollars in trying to do their second or third or fourth attempt at doing master data management, that the reason that it's not working is because they are not looking at it from the perspective of, and I'll use the term that you use because it is coming into vogue, the data product perspective, or the data product view, which is it's really intended to support the business intent and the business needs. And because a lot of these organizations have their master data management projects triggered by this perception that if we could only do this, then our data would be clean, or our data would be better, or our business processes will be better, they don't realize that all they're doing is they're opening up a can of worms that is going to cause a lot of cascading other problems that are going to prevent them from being able to make use of that data. So that bank that we did work, or the financial institution we did work with, my company did work with, that is struggling with trying to use their master data to produce insight into how they can better support their customers, they're stymied because the data is not there, or it doesn't get updated in time, or they're getting data that they don't trust, or the data that they use the customers don't trust. And so they go into this vicious cycle of, well, I'm getting reports, but I can't trust it, so I'm going to wait until more data comes in, but then more data comes in and I still don't trust it, so I'm just going to use my gut. And so you end up with this deteriorating value of information. And that can be addressed if you look at it from the perspective of, well, I don't have to wait for somebody to tell me what the data is. I'm going to explain to them what I want and what I want the perspective to be, and then let them produce the product that is best suited to my needs. So that is kind of looking backwards. The other perspective is looking forwards, which is none of these artificial. I'm going to backpedal a second. These large language models and generative AI tools, what they do is a very fascinating thing, which leads into this belief bias that just because a product like a generative AI, like a ChatGPT or one of the other ones, that it produces something that is believable is necessarily trustworthy. And yet there's a long laundry list of situations where generative AI systems have produced, you know, I'm now convinced that the word hallucination is the wrong word. I read a couple of academic papers that use a little more discrete set of language to talk about the outputs of some of these tools. It's essentially, in many cases, it's, maybe lying is the wrong word, but it's telling you what it thinks would be a reasonable answer, not what is a reasonable answer. And so for us to be able to modulate the excitement and exhilaration over the value of these types of tools, it's all going to come crashing down if it ends up generating stuff that is going to lead to bad decisions. So we need to make sure that there's the infrastructure in place that is going to attempt to put the frame around the output that comes out, so that there's some kind of differentiation between what is believable and what is truly trustworthy. And that's where I think, and again, Lulin, I think you referred to this. I think this is where the knowledge model needs to be able to encapsulate. Phil, you also mentioned this, to encapsulate the human's knowledge and use that to add discretion to the outputs of these systems. And only when an organization realizes that, okay, just because I have a tool that can do this doesn't mean that I should use it to do that without putting the right controls in place. And this is where I think there's lots of great opportunity for semantic layers and semantic modeling to really magnify the value of generative AI.
Yeah, I like to think of it as AI is non-deterministic, or certainly generative AI and LLMs. Yeah, you can guess the answer that it might give, but it might not always be the right answer, because there's always that, and I call it a random weighted dice roll, that goes on inside. So that's where it can hallucinate, and it can simply just get the wrong word that comes next. But I think adding a deterministic system in front of that, with taxonomies, ontologies, semantic layer, the knowledge graph of your business, can help lessen that instance and that impact, and also help you identify the accuracy within the response as well. I think that's really key. And I guess, Lily, are you seeing that in business now? Is there an understanding of this? I have lots of wow moments with generative AI every day, but I also realize that we have to temper that with the give it the foundation, a good foundation of knowledge. Like David said, put a frame around the responses that come out of it, that frames it in your business, that puts the language around it, that ensures the accuracy. And are you starting to see that shift in customers' expectations now when talking about these tools? Oh, we've just lost your audio.
Yeah, absolutely. It's we're shifting. Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now. Yeah.
I wonder what happened. You can hear me okay now?
Yeah.
Okay. No, I was saying we're seeing that shift. I think we went, Gen AI, the organizations are very much excited about it because the business gets it, right? Like you can interact with this machine directly. You don't need specific skills. Obviously, there's prompt engineering, but that's a different conversation. So the progression is, okay, Gen AI by itself for organizations, it doesn't really have a ton of value. So let's augment it with some context. So we went into RAG, right? Vector, like pulling in your context, because it's very expensive to train large language models. We did that, and the past year and a half has been like a year of POCs for many organizations and pilots, like a lot of experiments of what's going to work. And now we are seeing that, okay, RAG by itself also misses the point, misses the mark. So now we are seeing a shift into graph RAG, which is using knowledge graph as the map, that contextual information to augment your large language models. So this progression is a natural, organic way how organizations are realizing the value of semantic solutions. And as we are going through this process, I wouldn't say there is what we're seeing right now is one is better than the other. I think a hybrid model is what we've found to be very effective. So if depending on whatever you're looking for, let's say your use case is finding information, because at the end of the day, it's really the age-old knowledge and data management challenges. I can't find anything. Where do I have stuff? Where do we have data? So if you're solving for that problem, now we're seeing adaptation around what's called a kind of a semantic routing, meaning depending on what type of query the user puts in, it could be for search or a chatbot, you route it to the right place to go fetch the answer. If it's a simple keyword thing, use simple search, right? If it is more complex and that requires natural language or intent understanding, now you start getting into RAG and graph RAG, where the more complex your questions are, which is the case for many organizations, the more you're going to need a semantic solution to help you fetch the right answer. So I think a lot of organizations are seeing the value from this perspective, that because we're asking complex questions and AI doesn't understand complex questions within our organizational context, how do we give it that? How do we give it that organizational context? And that's where graph RAG is on the rise.
Yeah, and like I say, I think it's really interesting because there's people who've said, well, how have your organization changed? And I'm kind of thinking, we kind of have and we kind of haven't at the same time. You know, we're saying the same thing, which is contextualize your data, bring in all of that additional metadata about your data, the aboutness of your data, and connect it in a graph of that data to provide it to any application or downstream system. I think where AI comes into it is it's that knowledge discovery element that you touched on there, which is knowledge workers, and vast majority of people are knowledge workers, even if they don't realize it, spend an awful lot of time looking for information and trying to almost summarize information that they can then feed back into the business or they can interpret and things like that. And I think that's where the real key use cases for both the semantic layer and generative AI and things, which is that applied knowledge discovery. So it is that knowledge discovery where you want to take an action or gain insight from that. And you're only going to be able to do that if you have that human lens over your data. And that can be provided by that semantic layer and that knowledge graph. And yeah, I think we're just at the beginning of these things as well. Like you were saying, it's been a year of POCs for people. I think there'll be more next year. I do think there'll be more that go into production, that we start seeing those lower complexity but high value use cases for people. They, I think, will start to go into production for people as they start to build these. And this is the great thing about building these solutions. I'm gonna build up Semaphore for a bit, but building these solutions with these new UIs into these tools that allow business users access to what was traditionally in a data engineering environment. And that's not just with the generative AI now with that UI, but it's also with the tools that support it, like Semaphore, and being able to look at those graphs visually, but also edit them. So yeah, it's a really interesting conversation. Like I said, I didn't think we would get through all of my questions, and we haven't. But we do have a couple of questions from the audience. One is, will we have a recording, or can we provide the presentation? Yep, of course, the recording will go live shortly after this. We'll put it up onto our YouTube channel. It'll be available on demand via our website as well on progress.com. So you'll definitely be able to get access to it there. From an audience point of view, and I know you've mentioned a couple of examples, but Lily, but how does enterprise knowledge help provide that semantic layer solution to your customers? How are you helping them at the moment?
Yeah, there are. So it all starts with where you are on kind of like your maturity journey or what use cases that you have. So it's always important to take a step back and we always ask the question, what are we looking to solve? We talked about knowledge discovery is a big part of it. And, we made like our journey into the semantic space over the past 10 plus years is kind of it shows stories of like the different use cases we've worked on. So over the past few years, we have, I would say, 50 to 70 semantic layer implementations at different levels. It could be at like taxonomy and metadata design or knowledge graph 360 organizational view. So it's really important that the first thing that we ask is what business problems are we looking to solve? So starting from there, you start kind of like narrowing it down into what is the semantics problem, what's a business operations problem, because not everything is a knowledge and data problem. So we help our organizations go through this process of identifying what are the challenges, what are the use cases. And then it's really important to start really, really small. So we would identify 1 to 2 use cases, the high impact, low complexity that you talked about, Philip. That's the way we would go about it and identify what are the two to three things that we want to solve for first. And this could be in terms of like a discovery and search use case or knowledge creation or knowledge capture data analytics use case that I talked about earlier. It really depends on which part of the organization is driving this and where it's coming from. And then we would engage internal individuals that are SMEs, subject matter experts, from the top down to understand. It's always about bringing the business closer to the data, right? That's what the semantic layer is. So it's really critical we engage from the get-go, from day one, the SMEs, the subject matter experts, the domain experts, and employ knowledge capture, knowledge transfer techniques for that. And then from the bottom up, the data, right? Like, what is your data telling us? Structured, when I use data, structured, unstructured, semi-structured, all of your organizational knowledge assets. So this is the approach, and then start defining the architecture, conduct like that minimum viable product development for that semantic layer. This is where we start looking at solutions and tools like Semaphore. I know we've been working with you guys for a few years now, and a few others like a data catalog if that's necessary, a graph database, whatever will support the use case for that organization. And then defining that architecture, building the MVP, defining kind of the roadmap for how we would start with 1 or 2 business units or departments, for instance, because semantics is as valuable as the size of use cases and the business that it represents for your organization. So the most successful engagements are the ones that really engage the business from the get-go. And majority of the time, the business doesn't care if you're using ontology or taxonomy. They just want their problem solved. So we try to focus on not saying ontology as much because we get it, but it's not necessarily the case for their leadership in the business. So we work with practitioners also on the business side, upskilling in like how to build, maintain, grow. So this actually gets into another big piece that we're seeing in roles within organizations these days, because of the same nature of how the line is blurring between the structured and unstructured, the content teams and the data teams. Roles are also for semantic or practitioners and experts is evolving, shifting from officers like knowledge officers or data officers to enablement. How do we enable the business to answer this question? So that's another big shift that we're seeing, and that's why part of our approach is upskilling and literacy in the sense of like semantics, developing that. We have our Knowledge Graph University, that's one, or EK University, that has all this content. Training we provide with the Knowledge Management Institute for taxonomy, ontology, design is another example of that. So in a way, it's kind of different aspects of it, the development, strategy, design, implementation, and then training.
Yeah, I like that: design, maintain, and implement. That and that iterative approach, I think, is really important as well. I think when people look at a knowledge management project or a creating a knowledge graph of your business, I think they're looking at the whole mountain rather than just the steps ahead of them. So, these things don't have to be built in their entirety in order to deliver value. And we've seen that in our customers, where they start off with a small use case, small subset of their data, and then that grows and grows and grows and grows. Alan, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Apologies for the timing here. We had some time zone fun on this side of the fence. So that's fun and games. Hopefully he'll be joining us on camera shortly. I think he's having problems with his microphone. Okay, well, we'll wait for that. But
so in that interim, can I just reinforce something that Louis referred to, which is the techniques of being able to make use of a technical capability to empower the business user needs to focus on directing their attention to being able to articulate what their business problem is and how they want to solve it, as opposed to what I've seen over and over again in organizations, which is they believe they have a problem and they've been told that X is a solution, and then their concentration is drawn towards deploying X, as opposed to really well defining what their problem is. And so in some cases, you have to have a mechanism for drawing their attention to what is the problem and why is it a problem, and what are you trying to do. And I think that's one of the benefits of the semantic layer and the corresponding technologies, is that I don't need to tell a client how to develop a taxonomy. What I do need to do is to get them to explain to me why there's a difference in the classifications of these products, and who would really care what the differentiation is. So we can go back to the television example and Amazon, is that some people will go and they'll look for televisions, and others will look for a particular product code because they've already seen it somewhere else, and others will look for the terminology that revolves around the current state of the art in terms of television. So plasma screen or 4K capabilities or whatever else is the current lingo that's being used. And then the question becomes, well, why do I really care? And if the answer is, well, the problem is not how do we get people to find televisions searching through the search window, but rather how do we streamline the process by which we can present them with the information about the product that specifically they want to find, not the one that they think they're looking for. And I'm giving that as an example, but you can replicate the template of that, in any case. It's almost like no, I don't really care whether I'm moving people around in the airport using scooters or using bicycles or using an escalator. The question is, what do I need to do to move people around in the airport, and how do I want to do that in the optimal way so that we reduce accidents and we get people to their planes on time, or whatever it is. Shifting the conversation is the goal, and the knowledge or the intelligent knowledge worker today needs to be directed at what their problems are and how to better define that, and that is why the semantic technologies are actually so valuable.
Yeah, Yeah, it's interesting. You know, we've got a customer, and again, it goes. You touched on it there, which is that sort of what problem are you solving? And the problem that they were solving, really, in its simplicity, even though this solution is very advanced now, but in the simplicity, it was simply people were writing reports, and it was taking ages for them to find the right information to support the report that they were making. That was the problem. Yeah, it was taking them a long time to find relevant legislation or regulations that would support the recommendations they were making to their customers. And by implementing semantics, by pulling in classification of their data, applying a taxonomy, ontology, metadata to that data, and building a knowledge graph around it, they were able to create a structured authoring experience whereby they would get recommendations as they were typing as to what legislation was relevant to this particular part. And just that act saved them 2 hours a week per person across the organization, which sounds reasonable. But they had 7,500 people that were doing this, the users initially at launch, and it was saving them $2 million a week, which, if my maths is correct, is over $100 million a year in terms of labor saving. Just that one example, just that one aspect of someone's role. And so that's why we say, you know, start off small and build from there, because you can really make some substantial saving. And that's before they've now got on to start to add Gen AI into the mix and using that hybrid approach actually of the vectors with the knowledge graphs and things like that. So, you know, it's definitely interesting times for people. We'll try to get Alan on, but in the meantime, I've just got a couple of questions, which is, can AI enhance the effectiveness of your semantic layer? So that was one question that came through. Lily, you're smiling there, so I'm gonna give it to you. But can you use that in the development of these solutions? Is there a place for it there? Are we scared? We don't want to let it run riot, but you know, is there a place for that there?
Yeah, I'm smiling because, you know, this is where we talk about AI not being just generative AI. There is other parts of AI that have been in use. We've been using for over 10 years at this point to augment the development of semantics. So thinking in terms of, yes, so I would say more and more today, AI and semantics are becoming interlaced, and they have kind of like this symbiotic relationship where you can use AI solutions like natural language processing or named entity recognition, NER, to help extract entities from your data or from your content. So absolutely, we have been using it and it's impactful. That said, it doesn't mean that we would not need to have humans and those subject matter experts in the loop to validate. What it allows us to do is take the burden of development and the adoption early on to augment that piece and then shift our SMEs to validation, which saves a lot of time because many of the times these subject matter experts are busy individuals. They have a full-time job. They're running around doing their job. So it does help augment that development and shifting them to say yes, no, or giving them a way to give us a feedback loop. So yeah. I would say that's been the experience. Machine learning is another good example of a part of AI. And with Gen AI, especially when it comes to summarization, that is creating new content today. So leveraging that to kind of do some sort of content cleanup or get to a sizable content that a semantics would need to cover or deal with, that completeness of the semantic layer. That's where we're seeing that relationship between applying AI itself to help augment the development process for a semantic layer.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I know that the guys over at Semaphore have built the AI modeling tool, which is using AI to identify concepts and then feeding those concepts to those subject matter experts. And
Exactly.
I think one gentleman was able to identify 700 different concepts for a legal term in one day or something like that using the tool, because it's so much easier to yes, no, right, okay, this is how it goes. Okay. Yeah, it's definitely interesting time across there, both from the use of the tool in and of itself, but also then the development of those tools as well. So I don't think we're going to get Alan on for the moment. I don't think his camera is working, but uh, there's so much more that I want to talk about, but there's very little time left in these sessions. So I would love to have you back on again, and maybe we can expand the topics. We can go into deep dives into some of the things that we've talked about today, or cover off other topics. If you do have any questions for our speakers today, please feel free to reach out. We'll get you in touch with them. We can connect you across the social media, or we can connect you via email to these people. We're always more than happy to get our community talking to each other. Speaking of which, you can go to our community page, community forums, to start discussions with this, and that's another way that you can get engaged with these guys, but also other peers in the industry as well. Other users of Semaphore, but also other industry experts as well. Once again, thank you very much. Thanks for diving on, especially with all of the issues that we had with time zones and clocks changing. And whoever came up with that idea is named Mud over at this end. But yeah, thank you very much, Lily and David, for joining us. I think we've got a couple more of these from a Semaphore point of view before the end of the year, before we go into Christmas. And then we start into another new year, which I'm sure will have loads of interesting things to come from that. But please do join us again. Check out progress.com/webinars to find out our latest. And thanks again to our speakers, and for answering my questions and the audience questions as well today. It's been great. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Philip. Thanks, David. Speak soon.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.